The scream started at 2:47 a.m. on December the 3rd, 1995. By 2:52 a.m. an entire neighborhood was awake. By 3:15 a.m. the old wooden house on Cypress Street was nothing but ash and smoke, and somewhere in that chaos between the flames and the darkness, between heroism and horror, a truth was buried that wouldn't surface for 28 years. This is the story of a fire that took a mother and saved a baby, except that's not quite what happened. Not really. The truth was far more complicated, far more disturbing, and when it finally emerged, it would destroy the very people who thought they were heroes. The night everything changed. Istanbul's winters were brutal in the mid-1990s. The Gecekondu neighborhoods, those ramshackle settlements clinging to the city's hills like desperate climbers, were particularly vulnerable. Homes built from whatever materials people could salvage, scrap wood, corrugated metal, cardboard insulation. When temperatures dropped below freezing, families used everything they could to stay warm. Kerosene heaters, propane tanks, sometimes just open flames in metal barrels. The house where 23-year-old Zehra lived with her 6-month-old daughter Elif was one of these structures. 2 rooms, walls so thin you could hear conversations from 3 houses away, a roof that leaked when it rained. But it was home. Zehra had fled there after her husband had beaten her one too many times, seeking refuge with a distant cousin who'd offered her a corner of the cramped space. On that December night, Zehra had been asleep with Elif beside her on a thin mattress. The kerosene heater glowed orange in the corner, their only source of warmth. Neighbors would later say they'd warned her about that heater, told her it was dangerous, told her to at least open a window for ventilation. But when you're choosing between freezing and risk, you take the risk. No one knows exactly what happened. Maybe the heater tipped over. Maybe a spark caught the old fabric draped nearby. Maybe it was simply inevitable, the convergence of poverty, desperation, and bad luck that turns everyday survival into catastrophe. What everyone does know is that by the time Mehmet Öztürk smelled smoke, it was already too late to stop what was coming. Mehmet was 34 years old, unemployed, living in the house directly adjacent to Zehra's. He'd been awake. Insomnia plagued him most nights, smoking by his window when he saw the first flicker of orange through Zehra's walls. At first he thought it was just her heater. Then he saw smoke beginning to pour from gaps in the wooden planks. "Yangin!" he screamed. "Fire! Fire!" Within seconds, doors were flying open. Men poured out in their undershirts despite the cold. Women grabbed blankets and buckets. Someone ran toward the main road to find a phone. Cell phones were rare luxuries in 1995, and this neighborhood didn't have them. But Zehra's door didn't open. The smoke was too thick now, black and oily, billowing from every crack in the structure. The flames were spreading with terrifying speed, consuming the dry wood like paper. "There's a baby in there," someone shouted. "Zehra has a baby." Mehmet didn't think. He ran toward the door, wrapped his hand in his jacket, and grabbed the metal handle. It burned through the fabric instantly, searing his palm, but he yanked it open anyway. A wall of heat and smoke hit him like a physical force, driving him backward. "I can't see anything," he coughed, covering his face with his arm. "It's too thick." His neighbor, a man named Hassan, appeared beside him with a wet towel tied around his face. "We have to try, if there's a baby in there." They plunged into the smoke together, bent low where the air was slightly clearer. The heat was suffocating. Mehmet's eyes watered so badly he could barely see. The sound was even worse, the crackling roar of hungry flames, the groan of wood beginning to collapse, and underneath it all a sound that made his blood run cold. Crying, a baby crying. "There!" Hassan grabbed Mehmet's arm, pointing toward a corner of the room. Through the smoke they could just barely make out a mattress, and on it a small bundle wrapped in blankets, wailing. Mehmet lunged forward, grabbed the bundle, and stumbled back toward the door. Hassan was right behind him. They burst out into the cold night air, gasping, coughing, Mehmet's clothes smoking. In his arms the baby screamed. A good sign. Screaming meant breathing. "Where's Zehra?" someone asked. "Did you see the mother?" Mehmet shook his head, still coughing too hard to speak. Hassan bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. Couldn't see. Too much smoke. "Just the baby." "Someone has to go back," a woman cried. "Zehra's still in there." But it was already too late. As they stood there, the roof collapsed with a sound like thunder. Flames shot 30 feet into the air. The heat was so intense that people had to back away, shielding their faces. The fire brigade wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. By then, there would be nothing left to save. They searched the ruins for 3 days, once it was cool enough. They found bones, charred beyond recognition. The forensic examiner said they were consistent with an adult female, approximately 20 to 25 years old. DNA testing was expensive and rarely used in 1995 Turkey, especially not for a poor woman who died in an accidental fire in a gecekondu. The official report listed Zehra Yılmaz as deceased, cause of death, smoke inhalation and burns sustained in residential fire. Her family, what little she had, held a funeral with an empty casket. They had nothing to bury except grief. And baby Elif, she became a miracle, the baby saved from the flames, the child who survived when her mother didn't. The family that took her in, Mehmet and his wife Aylin, had been trying to have children for 7 years. 3 miscarriages, 2 rounds of fertility treatments they couldn't really afford. Each failure had carved a deeper wound in their marriage, a silence that grew between them with every negative test, every sympathetic look from friends who already had children. When Mehmet carried that baby out of the fire, Aylin saw it as a sign, divine intervention, a chance given by fate or God or whatever force controls these things. We should take her, Aylin said that same night, as Elif slept in a makeshift crib in their home. Social services hadn't arrived yet, in the chaos of the fire, with multiple families displaced and 1 woman dead. A baby in the care of the neighbors who'd saved her wasn't anyone's first concern. We don't know if she has family, Mehmet said carefully. Zehra told me once she had no one. That's why she was here, hiding from her husband. Her parents were dead. She had a sister somewhere, but they didn't speak. Aylin looked down at the sleeping baby. If we don't take her, she goes to an orphanage. Is that what you want? It wasn't what he wanted, but something about the situation made him uneasy in a way he couldn't quite articulate. The fire had happened so fast. Too fast. And Zehra's body. They'd found it in the far corner of the house near the back window. Why would she be there instead of next to her baby? But Aylin was already in love. She held Elif constantly those first few days, barely sleeping, barely letting anyone else touch her. And when social services finally did show up, 5 days after the fire, Aylin had her story ready.
Zehra asked me to be her daughter's guardian if anything happened to her, she lied smoothly. We talked about it just last week. She was so worried about that heater. She knew it was dangerous, but she had no choice. She made me promise I'd take care of Elif. There was no documentation, of course. But in 1995, in a neighborhood like this, documentation was more guideline than requirement. Social services was overwhelmed with hundreds of cases. An orphaned baby being cared for by kind neighbors who'd saved her from a fire? That was a success story, not a problem. The paperwork was pushed through. Mehmet and Aylin became Elif's legal guardians and eventually her adoptive parents. They moved away from the gecekondu within a year, to a real apartment with heat and electricity and walls that didn't let in the cold. They told Elif her story as she grew up. She'd been rescued from a fire as a baby. Her birth mother had died trying to save her. It was tragic, but also beautiful, proof that love could survive even the worst circumstances. Elif grew up believing she owed her life to the flames that took her mother and to the man brave enough to run into them. 28 years later, Elif was 28 years old when her world fell apart. She'd just gotten engaged to a man she'd been dating for 3 years. They were planning the wedding, talking about children, building the life she'd always imagined. Her parents, the only parents she'd ever known, were thrilled. But there was one problem. Her fiancé's mother was insistent about blood type compatibility, family medical history, all the things families worry about when their children are planning to have children. Elif had always been told her records from the orphanage were lost, that there was no information about her biological family's medical history. Just get a DNA test, her fiancé suggested. One of those ancestry ones. Maybe you'll find relatives. At least you'll know your genetic background. She did it almost on a whim. Sent in her saliva sample, waited 6 weeks, forgot about it. When the results came back, she was at work, bored, checking her email during a slow afternoon. The first thing she noticed was odd. The DNA test showed a close family match, a parent-level match. Her heart started racing. Her mother was dead, died in 1995. So this had to be her biological father, the man Mehmet and Aylin had told her they knew nothing about, the man Zehra had fled from. But when Elif clicked on the profile, her breath caught in her throat. The match was a woman, Zehra Yılmaz, age 51, living in Izmir. Elif stared at the screen. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. This had to be a mistake, a glitch in the system. Some other Zehra Yilmaz. Her mother was dead. They'd had a funeral. There'd been a body. She called the DNA company. They confirmed. Based on the genetic markers, this person was either her mother or an identical twin. Elif knew her mother didn't have an identical twin. Zehra had told Aylin she had one sister, not a twin, which meant the next call Elif made was to the woman whose profile had shown up as her match. Her hands shook so hard she could barely dial. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. Hello? The voice was unfamiliar, middle-aged, cautious. Are you Zehra Yilmaz? Elif's voice cracked. Did you live in Istanbul in 1995? Silence. Then, very quietly, who is this? My name is Elif. I was born in June 1995. I was told my mother died in a fire when I was 6 months old. But the DNA test says you're my mother. The silence stretched so long Elif thought the woman had hung up. Then she heard something that sounded like a sob being choked back. Elif, the woman whispered. Oh my God. Elif, they told me you were taken, that social services had you, that I'd never find you because I didn't exist anymore. I've been looking for you for 28 years. The truth about the fire. They met in a cafe in Ankara, neutral territory, halfway between Istanbul and Izmir. Elif brought her fiancé for support. Zehra came alone. The woman who walked in looked nothing like the photos Elif had seen of her young mother. This woman was gray-haired, thin, with the kind of hard-worn face that comes from decades of poverty and hiding. But when she saw Elif, her eyes filled with tears, and Elif knew. You don't fake the way this woman looked at her. No one was that good an actress. Tell me what happened, Elif said. Her voice was cold, defensive. She didn't know what to believe yet. Zehra took a shaky breath. The fire was real, she started. But I didn't die in it. I wasn't even in the house when it started. What? I'd gone out, just for 20 minutes. There was a small grocery store 2 streets over that stayed open late. I needed milk for you. You'd been fussy all evening, not settling, and we were out. I left you sleeping. I thought I was only going to be gone a few minutes. Her hands twisted in her lap. When I came back, I saw the smoke from 2 blocks away. I ran. I was screaming your name. But by the time I got there, the neighbors had already pulled you out. Mehmet was standing there holding you, and Aylin was next to him, and you were crying, but alive. And I was so grateful. So why didn't you take me back? Zehra's face crumbled. Because my husband found me. Right there, in the crowd watching the fire. Kamal, the man I'd run from, the man who'd put me in the hospital twice. He grabbed me, said if I made a scene, he'd kill me right there. Said the fire was convenient. Everyone would think I'd died. I could disappear quietly, or I could disappear permanently. And you just left me? I fought him. I swear to God I fought. But he was dragging me away and you were safe in Aylin's arms, and I thought... She wiped her eyes. I thought maybe you were better off. Better with people who could protect you than with me running from a violent man. I thought I was keeping you safe by disappearing. Elif felt something cold settling in her chest. You left me with strangers. I left you with people who'd saved your life. I watched them for days after, hiding, following them. I saw how Aylin held you, how carefully Mehmet treated you. They seemed kind. They seemed safe. And I was 23 years old, terrified, with nothing. What could I give you except more fear? The truth, Elif said flatly. You could have given me the truth. Zehra's story continued. She'd fled Izmir with Kamal still hunting her, spent years moving from city to city, working under the table, using fake names. She'd tried to track down Elif multiple times, but had no resources, no connections, no way to navigate the system legally since she was officially dead. Every inquiry risked exposing her location to Kamal. And now? Elif asked. Why surface now? Kamal died 3 years ago. Heart attack. For the first time in 28 years, I could stop hiding. I got legal papers, reclaimed my identity, and I did the DNA test, hoping that maybe you'd do the same someday. That maybe you'd been told the truth about being adopted and you'd want to find your biological family. Elif sat back, her mind reeling. Part of her wanted to believe this story. Part of her wanted to rage at this woman for abandoning her, regardless of the circumstances. And part of her was just broken, her entire life story rewritten in the span of an hour. Did Mehmet and Aylin know? She finally asked. Did they know you were alive? Zehra hesitated. I don't know. I never spoke to them. But after the fire, I saw Aylin the next day. I was hiding across the street watching. She was holding you, talking to some social services woman. And she was crying, telling this elaborate story about how I'd asked her to take care of you if anything happened. I never said that. I barely knew her. We'd exchanged maybe 10 words total in the month I'd lived there. The implication hung in the air like smoke. The confrontation. Elif went home in a daze. She didn't tell Mehmet and Aylin, the parents who'd raised her, the people she'd called mom and dad for 28 years, what she'd discovered. Not yet. First, she needed to think, to process, to decide what she believed. But 3 days later, she couldn't hold it in anymore. She showed up at their apartment at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. They were watching television, comfortable in their retirement. When they saw her face, they knew something was wrong. I found her, Elif said without preamble. I found Zehra, my biological mother. She's alive. The color drained from Aylin's face. Mehmet went very still. That's not possible, Aylin said. We buried her. We went to her funeral. You buried bones from the fire, but they weren't hers. She wasn't in the house when it started. How do you... I spoke to her. DNA doesn't lie. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Mehmet spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What did she tell you? That you knew she was alive, that Aylin lied to social services to keep me, that you took advantage of a woman in crisis to get the baby you couldn't have yourselves. That's not true. Aylin stood up, hands shaking. We saved you. You would have died in that fire if not for us. And I'm grateful for that. But what happened after? Did you know she was alive? Mehmet and Aylin exchanged a look. The kind of look that passes between two people who've kept a secret for decades and are trying to decide if it's time to confess. We saw her, Mehmet admitted. 2 days after the fire, she was watching from across the street, just standing there, staring at our house where we had you. And you didn't say anything? We thought she was a ghost at first, Aylin said. I nearly had a heart attack, but then I realized she'd left you alone during the fire. Whatever her reasons, she'd walked away. And we had been trying to have a baby for so long. You were right there in our arms, and she was just watching, not coming forward, not claiming you. So I made a choice. To lie. To protect you. Aylin's voice broke. I went outside. I told Zehra that if she really loved you, she'd let us raise you, that we could give you stability, safety, a real home. That she was running from something. Anyone could see it in the way she kept looking over her shoulder. I told her she could disappear, that everyone already thought she was dead, and you'd be safe with us. And she just agreed? She cried, Mehmet said quietly. She cried, and she asked if we'd love you, if we'd keep you safe. We promised we would, and then she walked away. Elif felt tears streaming down her face. You let me believe my mother died for me. You let me grow up thinking she sacrificed herself, and all along she was alive, grieving, looking for me. We gave you a good life, Aylin protested. We loved you as our own. We gave you everything we had. Would you really have been better off with her? Running from an abusive husband, living in poverty, hiding? It was the question that had no good answer. Because in truth, Mehmet and Aylin had given Elif a good life. They'd loved her genuinely. She'd never wanted for anything, never felt like she wasn't their real daughter. By any measure, they'd been good parents. But they'd built that life on a lie, on taking advantage of a desperate woman's moment of crisis, on choosing their own desire for a child over a mother's right to her daughter. I don't know, Elif said finally. I don't know what would have been better. But I know you should have given me the choice. You should have told me the truth. She left that night and didn't speak to them for 6 months. The wedding was postponed. Her relationship with her fiancé strained under the weight of her crisis. She started therapy. She met with Zehra several more times, trying to build a relationship with a stranger who had her eyes, her nose, her genetic code, but none of her memories. It was messy. It was painful. There were no easy answers, no neat resolution. Elif learned to hold multiple truths at once. That Mehmet and Aylin had saved her life, but also stolen it. That Zehra had abandoned her, but also sacrificed for her. That love can be real and genuine even when it's built on deception.
The aftermath. Eventually, Elif did speak to Mehmet and Aylin again, not because she'd fully forgiven them, but because she realized that anger, no matter how justified, was just another form of being trapped. She set boundaries, required honesty, demanded they acknowledge what they had done. They did in their way. Aylin especially struggled with it, accepting that her greatest joy had also been her greatest sin. But slowly, painfully, they built something new. Not the relationship they'd had before, but something more honest, if less comfortable. Elif also built a relationship with Zehra. It was awkward, marked by gaps that couldn't be filled, by 28 years of missed birthdays and first days of school and all the mundane moments that make a parent and child bond. But they tried. The wedding eventually happened. Both Zehra and Aylin attended, sitting on opposite sides of the room, united only in their love for the same woman and their grief over the circumstances that had brought them to this point. When people asked Elif about her family, she learned to say, "It's complicated." Because it was. She had the parents who raised her and the mother who gave birth to her. She had the man who saved her from fire and the woman who'd survived a different kind of burning. She had gratitude and resentment, love and anger, truth and lies, all tangled together in a way that could never fully be untangled. The fire that night in 1995 had taken more than a house. It had consumed trust, truth, and the simple story Elif had been told about who she was. But from those ashes she'd built something new, a harder truth, a more complex understanding, and the knowledge that family, like fire, can both destroy and forge something strong. The baby saved from the flames had grown into a woman who'd survived a different kind of burning, and she was still standing, still breathing, still moving forward. That perhaps was the real miracle.